the uprising we saw in Cuba, the mass demonstrations, the spontaneous demonstrations, and the fearless demonstrations in what is essentially a police state where you can vanish very easily, and people have vanished since those demonstrations took place. It was unprecedented. In 60 years of communism, 60 years of brutal communism, 60 years of mass murdering communism, this is the first time we've really seen this kind of rebellion. And, people in Cuba live in intense fear. They infiltrate any demonstration and make sure their leaders disappear. So what happened? Well, first of all, they got internet. So for about 3 years, they had some social media, so they got to connect with one another. And then there was COVID-19, and things were going really badly. Why are they protesting? Why are they protesting communism? The State Department tried to make it sound like, they're just protesting the fact that their treatment for COVID-19 is not going well. But no, they were protesting the actual, what they call the revolution. And we've talked about this before, that the constitutional limits that we have on government create the illusion that there's such a thing as the state that loves you, right? Because we have had constitutional limits on government, the people who go into government are restrained in their love of power. And that makes us think, gee, government is a good thing, so we can trust government to redistribute wealth. We can trust government to take care of our health care. We can trust government to do all those things, giving government more and more power. And then you find out that the state, this beneficent state, this generous state, was always an illusion. In fact, all the state is people with power, and you give them more power, they become more corrupt. And absolute power corrupts absolutely, and that's what happened in Cuba. They often point out, the people who like the left and the people who want to maintain this theory of communism, which is supposed to work and supposed to make everything fair, they like to talk about the fact that Fidel Castro at the end of the 50s overthrew a brutal dictator, Batista. And that is true. I mean, Batista started out as an efficient a dictator, but an efficient dictator. Then he basically went through a period where he left the country and went to Florida, came back to Cuba, and just was an absolute tyrant. And he had taken over from a tyrant before him. They like to say that the guy before him was a liberal, but he was a mass murdering tyrant too. So they've just had one mass murderer after another, and Fidel Castro was just another one. He killed at least 11,000 people, just murdering them, taking over. He has been a thug from the beginning, and he always was. And the thing is, the way that communism usually rises up is that there's corruption or oppression, and the communists who take office are frequently motivated by a theory, and that theory makes them idealistic. And then when they get into power and they realize that their theory doesn't work, but they have all this power, rather than abandon the theory, which has been the motivating factor of their life, and say, the theory doesn't work, let's go back to reality, they just start to enjoy the power and start to lock down on the people. And nothing the left loves like a theory. There's this old joke where the left says, yes, that will work in fact, but will it work in theory? And that is the thing. Communism may work in theory. Socialism may work in theory. And that's why it's so popular in places where you don't have to prove yourself. The academy, Hollywood, the news media, where you don't have to build things that work. You can just talk about how generous you are. They love that theory. It makes them feel generous. But once you have the power, it just doesn't work, because the state is based on a lie. It's based on the lie of a benevolent state. So when Castro died, I guess about 5 years ago, the press could not let go of the fact that this guy was a murdering tyrant, that if you go to Cuba, the place looks like it's still the 1950s. They're driving these old cars. If you drive a cab, the police pull you over and take bribes from you. It is an entire place that runs on corruption and on oppression. And listen to the way the news media treated the death of Fidel Castro.
What he's done in Cuba has been a success in the sense that Cuba has one of the highest literacy rates in the world. They have doctors that they send, again, all over the world.
By then a declared socialist, he dramatically improved health care and literacy.
Many saw positives: education and health care for all, racial integration.
You see the medicine system they are very proud of. You see athletes, and think of how many Cuban athletes have enriched the sports in this country and around.
I'm quite certain that they're not celebrating his death in Cuba, as he brought health care, and he got rid of Batista, and he make literacy a part of the Cuban government.
Even Castro's critics praised his advances in health care and in education.
And he was the original revolutionary. He was the man the people called the Great Revolutionary.
Fidel Castro was considered, even to this day, the George Washington of his country.
Wow, I just hope that I can murder enough people to get that kind of reaction from the press when I die. I mean, I'm not sure I have a big enough kill count to make it into the hearts and minds of the press, but Fidel Castro certainly did. And you kept hearing that one refrain: the healthcare, so much. Oh, the healthcare. Michael Moore made an entire film about this. Michael Moore, the make-believe communist who parks his limousine around the corner before walking into a building so no one will see how badly he treats the many, many servants he has from his millions and millions of dollars that he's made making communist movies. Michael Moore made an entire film, 2007, called Sicko, about how wonderful the healthcare system was in Cuba. Here's just a little bit of that.
The Cuban people have free, universal health care. They become known around the world as having not only one of the best healthcare systems, but as being one of the most generous countries in providing doctors and medical equipment to third world countries. In the U.S., healthcare costs run nearly $7,000 per person. But in Cuba, they spend only $251. And yet the Cubans are able to have a lower infant mortality rate than the United States, a longer average lifespan than the United States. They believe in preventive medicine, and it seems like there's a doctor on every block. Their only sin when it comes to healthcare seems to be that they don't do it for a profit.
Every word of that is false. So, I mean, think about this for a minute. If the healthcare is so great that every news media, every news outlet was praising Fidel Castro for his healthcare, Michael Moore makes an entire movie about it. They take to the streets, and suddenly the State Department is saying, well, it's because of COVID. Where's their great health care? Where's the great health care that was going to save everybody? And they just don't care about the profits. Here's what happened. I will tell you what happened. Cuba is broke. It's not because they keep saying, well, it's because of the embargo. It's the American embargo. America does not embargo food and medicine. It sends them medicine. It sends them food. And of course, it also sends them dollars because people who, the number of Cuban Americans, of people who have left Cuba and are now Americans, it's about a fifth of the number of people who live in Cuba. So it's about 2 million, say, Cuban Americans, and there's about 11 million Cubans. The few Cubans who live in America make more in the aggregate, and they're not one of the highest earning minorities in America. They make more than the entire island of Cuba, okay? So their economy in Cuba stinks. They are broke. What do they do about being broke? Well, they do train a lot of doctors, and basically they human traffic these doctors and send them to other places, take the money from them. They don't let the doctors make the money. They take it back and they feed it back into the regime. And when I say back into the regime, it's not into health care for the people. It's for the mansions and the women that all these tyrants always have. So they're essentially trafficking their doctors when they say they're sending them out in charity to these places. No, they are feeding the mouths of the dictators by sending these guys out and making doctors. When people in America, when Cubans in America or Cuban Americans make money here and they send those dollars back to their family, you know what happens? The family gets the dollars, but then the government sets up stores that have much needed items in them that only accept dollars. And so you have to go in and buy those with your dollars that you got from America. And where do those dollars go? Back into the economy to feed people and help it? No, of course not. They go back into the regime. They rule by terror. They always rule by terror. And what happened was they got the internet 3 years ago and people started talking. These rappers and artists and poets started sending around, paeans to freedom, basically. And one of the rappers had this thing, Fatherland, Fidel's motto was Fatherland or death. But the rappers are saying, no more lies. My people demand freedom. No more doctrines. Let us no longer shout fatherland or death, but fatherland and life. Fatherland and life. You wonder why I talk about the culture all the time. You wonder why I talk about the arts and why they won't let constitutionalists get near Hollywood and why they won't let anybody who believes in freedom get near Hollywood or work in Hollywood. This is why. This is why, because when you hear the artists, when the artists come, they touch your heart, they remind you of that yearning you have for freedom, that yearning you have to be an individual and have your individuality count for something and mean something in the world, and they do not want that yearning to breathe free. So the people take to the streets. And they wave the American flag and they shout Libertad. And now they've all been shut down. They took away their internet. They basically are incommunicado. The entire island is incommunicado. But they're out there waving American flags and shouting Libertad. And Joe Biden, who is the make-believe president, he made all the right comments. This is cut 9.
The Cuban people demanding their freedom from an authoritarian regime. And I don't think we've seen anything like this protest in a long, long time, if quite frankly ever. The United States stands firmly with the people of Cuba as they assert their universal rights. And we call on the government of Cuba to refrain from violence, their attempts to silence the voice of the people of Cuba.
So he's saying the right things right there, but what is he doing? I mean, he's trying to pass trillions of dollars in spending that will make the government enormous. It will make government spending enormous and socialistic. I mean, he's going to say, oh, we're going to pay for your child. You know, you're going to get all this money if you have a child, and we're going to take care. There's going to be daycare where we can teach them that he thinks he's a boy, but he's not really a boy. We can teach them critical race theory, so he will hate his neighbor for being a different color or hate himself for being white. They simply are not going to let Cubans escape from Cuba. Our southern border is unprotected. People are pouring in from South America and Mexico. People are just pouring in, and they won't do anything about it. I mean, they sent Kamala Harris to look into it, look into the root causes. They want to find the root causes. How are they reacting to the uprising in Cuba? Don't come here. This is Alejandro Mayorkas, the head of Homeland Security. This is his message to the Cuban people.
Allow me to be clear. If you take to the sea, you will not come to the United States. The time is never right to attempt migration by sea. To those who risk their lives doing so, this risk is not worth taking. Again, I repeat, do not risk your life attempting to enter the United States illegally. You will not come to the United States.
What's the difference between a Mexican and a Cuban? They think the Mexicans will vote Democratic. That's the difference. That's the difference. They lost Florida because, for one reason, was because the Cuban Americans who live down there are not going to vote for Democrats because they know socialism when they see it. The reaction on the left is a reaction to preserve the idea of communism, the theory of communism. When I say that charity is based on reality, I mean it's based on results. Your intentions don't matter a damn. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. You ever think about that slogan, the road to hell is paved with good intentions? You know, shouldn't it be paved with like flaming skulls or something like that? No, it's paved with good intentions because good intentions make you feel good. They parade your virtue, but they don't do anything for the people that you are supposedly trying to help. Listen to the left cover up for the communist regime. Here's Reuters. They're very concerned. They say Cuban protests risk exacerbating COVID-19 spike. Did they worry about that when BLM was burning down Portland and Minneapolis? Did they worry about the COVID-19 spike? No, because actually, if you're a communist, you don't spread COVID-19. It's only when you protest communism that suddenly you spread COVID-19. It's like a mask. Communism is like a mask, that protects you from spreading COVID-19. Black Lives Matter can burn cities to the ground, can completely destroy businesses, destroy dreams, destroy lives, but they won't spread COVID because they are a Marxist organization. How do we know? Because here's what Black Lives Matter said about Cuba. Black Lives Matter, this is their statement, Black Lives Matter condemns the U.S. federal government's inhumane treatment of Cubans and urges it to immediately lift the economic embargo. It's all our fault that communism never works. Remember, BLM was started by what they described themselves as was trained Marxists, and they do not want to let the theory go because the theory makes you virtuous, but the reality makes people slaves. It happens again and again and again. AOC, Alexandria Occasional Cortex, she put out a thing saying, we stand with the people of Cuba, but it's all America's fault as well. And just remember, they're out there waving, it breaks your heart. They're out there waving the American flag and shouting Libertad. But what are we saying about the American flag? A headline in the New York Times for July 4th was a 4th of July symbol of unity. The flag may no longer unite. Jen Psaki was challenged on this about the flag. Here's cut 11.
Recently, the New York Times described the American flag as alienating the sun, but we've seen these Cuban protesters flying the American flag as a symbol for freedom. We saw it in Hong Kong as well. So does the administration support international protesters flying the American flag, and what message do you have to Americans who are wary of flying it here in the U.S.?
Well, I would say first, the president certainly values and respects the symbol of the American flag. He's someone who certainly waves it outside of his house, or does in Delaware and other places where he's lived throughout his time. But he also believes that people have the right to peaceful protest, and he thinks both can be true.
Here's what Joe Biden with his American flag. What's left of Joe Biden, anyway. Here's what Joe Biden is saying about America. In America, in many states, they're trying to secure elections by having people show ID, by having people not collect other people's votes. Just basic stuff. This is what he says about it. Cut 13.
This year alone, 17 states have enacted, not just proposed, but enacted, 28 new laws to make it harder for Americans to vote. Not to mention, and catch this, nearly 400 additional bills Republican members of the state legislatures are trying to pass. The 21st century Jim Crow assault is real. It's unrelenting.
Yeah, it's 21st century Jim Crow. Why would he fly the American flag? I wouldn't. I wouldn't if I thought this country was riddled with Jim Crow, if I thought this was the greatest crisis in the world since the Civil War, which he also said the U.S. State Department has invited UN experts who investigate racism and minority issues to conduct an official visit to the United States. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has said. Blinken says, this is also, he's speaking for Winkin and Nod here. Winkin, Blinken, and Nod say responsible nations must not shrink from scrutiny of their human rights accord. Rather, they should acknowledge it with the intent to improve. The Cubans are waving the American flag, but not the Americans, not these leftist Americans. They are the regime. They are the Cuban regime. I know they're not mass murdering. I'm not accusing them of that. And I know that they're not a brutal communist regime, but they are a communist regime. They are socialists. And it's the same thing. The illusion that the state is going to take care of you is an illusion that lasts just until the state has the power to stomp on you, and it will. It always does. It always has. Why should it be any different? There's an old Irving Berlin song. It's in a Fred Astaire and Bing Crosby movie that ends, I'll see you in CUBA. And that's the way I feel about the Democrats. We see you in CUBA. We know why you're standing up for that regime. We know who you are. We see you in CUBA.